Good afternoon. Welcome to the MMA webinar series. Today is the 14th of May, and our presentation today is on how you stay healthy, happy, and productive during these times. This session is designed in partnership with Ogilvy, and we have the pleasure of having Ogilvy participate and share some of the behavioral sciences insights that they have been able to accumulate and how they feel that different side of the human behavior is reflected at different times. This session, as we understand, is key to understand the human psyche, but at the same time, to get us prepared for what we have already seen and what is yet to come. It's also important that we believe all of you as attendees and participants also take certain learnings from here. There is a lot of learning. People are looking at this situation, this forced situation, differently. Not everybody is as disappointed as one would have assumed if this was a hypothetical situation, and how people are making the best use of a situation which one would not have really envisaged about 3 months back. There are a lot of learnings of how people are using this time to reconnect with family, to reconnect with friends, but also how they are using this time to stay more productive, learn a lot more. With the more time, the less time that you spend on commute is the more time you are spending on learning new things, is what I was having a conversation with somebody, and we discussed, if I'm going to save an hour of commute every day, how can I use that hour more effectively? So there are a lot of insights we believe that you will be able to take good learnings out of. And if there are any follow-up questions on this, because it is more around behavioral sciences, we do have a speaker who has offered to be able to answer those questions as a follow-up later on. So before we get into our speakers, before I hand you over to our speaker for the day, a quick introduction to MMA for some of you who may not have been acquainted with MMA. We are an industry body focused on helping build advertising and marketing in the mobile space. We are an international association based out of New York with operations in every continent across the world. And some of our members are there. We are on the screen for you to see. We are a marketeer agencies, media seller, technology, and operator membership organization, which is unlike many other industry bodies which are focused on either one of these parties. Our purpose is really to serve the chief marketer, to help them understand the value of mobile, to help them represent what marketing in the future could look like and how they can benefit. And really, in order to transform the acceleration of what the new world will look like. I think COVID-19 specifically has initiated the need for quick digital transformation, which we have all been working on, discussing, and debating. But it has really demonstrated, this last 3 months have demonstrated how we are all very prepared, and if not, how quickly we need all to be prepared to get on to the next phase of digitization. As part of MMA, we create a lot of best practices, guidelines, policies, and obviously, as any industry body, we also work on ensuring that we have advocacy in this space. With regard to some of the programs that MMA has, we work on research, we work on organization think tank, we work on attribution, and we have a lot of the marketing peer group discussion, industry working group discussions. We also do our events across 30 markets around the world, 20 markets, 30 events. And we, as part of our inspiration work that we do, we have Smarties Awards, which are the best in class mobile campaigns, which also serve as a great use case for the industry to learn from. In these times, we've also built a MMA COVID marketer support hub where we are trying to put together all the learnings that we have around COVID from a marketing perspective. So we believe this is a really valuable hub for marketeers, for agencies, for media publishers, etc., to learn of what's happening in the advertising business. What are some of the best practices, use cases that are coming out? What are some of the trends and some of the tools and services that one can use for advertising and marketing? And we believe this is one of our best efforts to help cater to the need of what the marketing industry needs to look at. As part of this series, we have a lot of webinars. We started this webinar campaign a month back. We've done 12 webinars in the last 5 weeks. And as you can see, we have a very packed webinar schedule going forward too. We have one webinar planned for later today evening for Middle East and Africa, which is focused on Ramadan learnings from Indonesia. And then I'm also launching a new series called There's No Playbook for This, which clearly is the case for COVID. Nobody was prepared. And this is a series which is going to be done every Friday at 3 o'clock. And the purpose of this is to look at what will the world be with a positive spin, with an intent to thrive, overcoming these difficult times. And I have leaders across businesses who are going to join me for a conversation about the future and how we shape the future. And there are some other webinars listed there. Get Craft around case studies. How do you build case studies? TikTok about UGC. Martech, which is the power of transformation of Martech in China. Facebook and Swiggy. And you can scan that QR code if you want to go and register for any one of them right away. Some of the other MMA programs and initiatives are in the space of measurement, Internet of Things, location, and so on and so forth. I'm not going to read the entire slide, but it gives you a good idea of what MMA does and how we are engaged. We would encourage you all to get engaged with us and work with us and reach out to us if there are areas that you would like us to work on. So with that, I'm going to move on to the next section, which is the Q&A. We would like this session to be very interactive and engaging. You all can see the questions in your toolbar, in your control panel. You can use that to ask questions to the panel. And when you do that, please make sure that you put in your name, your company name, and your designation so that we are aware of what that context of that question is. And you can use the hashtag MMAWeb if you are sharing any insights out of this session on the social media. So, our panel of speakers today is Sam Tatam, who's a consulting partner and head of Ogilvy Behavioral Sciences, based out of UK, and Ashutosh Srivastava, CEO GroupM Asia. They are going to, Sam is going to present his insights on behavioral sciences, and Ashu is going to tag team on giving some anecdotal real life use cases of how an organization as big as GroupM is actually using some of these insights of behavioral science to present to its partners, to its workforce, to its marketeers and clients, and how it has all been very fruitful for them as an organization. And I am Rohit Dadwal, the moderator and host of your session. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Sam and Ashu to take us forward from here. Thank you and welcome, guys.
Thank you so much, Rohit. And thank you everyone for joining us. Really excited to spend the next little while talking a little bit about both behavioral science, but more explicitly outlining a piece of work that we drove within the Ogilvy group to help us manage remote working. So how we might use the current situation to start to consider a different way of working over time, a more sustainable way of working in the future. And lovely to have the opportunity to converse with Ashu as we go throughout some of the core implications. To touch sort of really quickly on where I come from. So again, my name's Sam. I'm typically in the office in London. I'm actually speaking to you now from Australia. So moved over a couple of months ago just for lockdown here, which has been a different move for me. But I work within a team of 12 psychologists and behavioral economists, and we look to bring the world of behavioral science to marketing, to communications, to organizational change. And that's really the core of what we'll be speaking about today. And often when we speak with clients, and behavioral sciences is a relatively new term, although you might argue it sort of codifies and captures a lot of what we might have intuitively known for a long time. But when speaking initially as to sort of why we're excited by behavioral science as a group, we often use this analogy. It's almost historically like we might have been viewing the marketing world or the business world through a pair of broken binoculars. And these broken binoculars have two fractured lenses. The first fractured lens on the left-hand side here, we can see is neoclassical economics, an assumption that humans are always rational, that we're utility maximizers, that we navigate the world with perfect information and perfect trust, and we tend to make behaviors and decisions accordingly. But what we know through actual behavior is that we don't always behave this way. There are some consistent behaviors like altruism that stands against a classical model. So we need another framework to help us better understand this. And the second fractured lens on the right-hand side is about hypothetical decision makings. An assumption that we might be able to ask people how they might respond in a certain environment, or ask people why they might have conducted a particular behavior, or what might encourage them or change their behavior in the future. What recent research is telling us is that up to 90 to 95% of our decision making is actually made in an evolutionary old part of our brain. It's a part of our brain that we often say it's opaque to introspection. We can't ask it why it might have behaved in a particular way because it simply can't tell us. So we tend to generate a socially desirable response, or the sort of response that we think should be right, not actually the real driver of this action. And that can be an action or a behavior, or it could be an emotion like happiness or productivity that we'll talk about today. So behavioral science, which is sort of a banner term for subdisciplines like psychology, social psychology, cognitive psychology, behavioral economics, and experimental psychology, is starting to give us another way in which we can justify and answer some of these questions and proactively take us into the future. And let's for a moment sort of think, okay, we'll talk a little bit today about sort of organizational change and individual performance, but let's assume for a moment we're in a marketing department. And we're on the marketing department of CocaCola. And the challenge that we've been set is how we can boost the sales of CocaCola, for example. And let's go back to our two fractured lenses of neoclassical economics and hypothetical decision-making. And we might expect, if we were to ask consumers this question, people might say, make it cheaper. How do we make the can a little bit, how do we make the product cheaper? Sometimes we often hear, make the product bigger, give people more value for money. That's going to be the sort of thing that's actually going to shape response and drive behavior. Sometimes we also hear, make it taste better, make it taste different, might be a response. And these, I might see sort of a couple of nodding heads through the screen. I mean, these feel quite logical, rational responses. But what's really interesting is if we look at a competitor, that's one of the competitors that's given Coca-Cola probably the biggest run for its money in the last 10, 15 years. It's a brand like Red Bull. It's a product that's half the size. It costs twice as much. And certainly when you taste it for the first time, it tastes a bit horrendous, right? It actually tastes worse, not better. And there's something about the psychology there, right? By tasting a little bit nasty, by tasting a little bit bad, you reinforce the fact that it must be doing something good for you. How do I believe that it's giving me wings if it just tastes like a soft drink? If I taste a little bit more like a medicine, then maybe that's the case. And experimental psychology and behavioral science is starting to arm us with these insights to pose provocative questions of our environment and our thinking to find effective solutions. So that's sort of a marketing example, and sometimes we share this. People might think it's a one-off. It's a one-off example. So I have a quick question for us now, and I'll ask us in a moment to use the polls for our response. And the question is, which square is darker on this checkerboard? Which square is darker, the A square or the B square? Now, I'll ask you to sort of hold your answer in your mind. Rohit, if you're able to throw the poll up, and which square is darker, the A square or the B square? An easy one to start the afternoon.
So we will have this poll open for next 30 odd seconds. Please have your say. We have very quick polling. Actually, we have 50% of people who've already voted. Please do have your say. It's an interesting question. And from the initial results that I see, it's an interesting results. So we will close the poll in next 5 seconds.
I need a drum roll function.
Yeah, closing the poll now. Thank you. And the results are on the screen, Sam, for you.
Oh, all right. So we had some interesting results. So we had 38% say the A square. We had 21% actually that said the B square, and a lot of people that said, so 41% said they're both the same. So quite a spread there. And it is, for 41% of us, we've identified that it is a bit of a trick question. Actually, both the A square and the B square are the exact same shade of grey. And I've seen this 1,000 times before, but I promise you I still see the A square as being darker than the B square. And actually, most often people tend to say the A square looks darker. And I can tell you why this is the case. It's the case actually if you look at the B square, it's surrounded by 4 darker squares. So the brain isn't a rational luminance detector. We don't navigate with perfect RGBs or like a color printer. We see contextually. And because the B square is surrounded by 4 darker squares within the pattern, it's an assumption that it must also be lighter. We've also over time learned to navigate the world under shadow. We know that things that are sort of cast under a shadow are actually lighter than they might appear. So our brain tends to superimpose meaning that the B square is even lighter than it looks because it's under the shadow of the column, and our brain sort of computes that information to give us an overall representation. But I can say that, and you might sort of believe me that the B square and the A square are the same shade of grey, but still I see them perceptually as quite different. So what happens when I actually start to remove the context? We can see that they are absolutely the same. So the 41% of us that said they were the same were absolutely right. And we love illusions like this in behavioral science, not because we often go to clients in organization change or when we're looking at being more productive and give people a visual illusion. What it does is help to sort of better understand some of the fundamentals of the brain. That the brain is not a rational calculator, it's highly context dependent. It's a relative, we navigate the world relatively, not perfectly or absolutely. So just as we've seen, many of us have seen the A square as being darker than the B square, we can often also shape perceptions of value or cost by the relative frame. And this really lives in the evolution of the human brain. So unsurprising probably to us that this is a result of how our brain is sort of functions, and that function as a result of evolution. And the human brain is an incredibly complex organism. There are, I think, more neurons in the human brain than there are stars in the galaxy. So one way in which we can sort of understand pragmatically how our decision making operates is by thinking of the brain in 2 different systems. The system on the left-hand side being our evolutionary older brain, the part of our brain closest to our brainstem. This is our unconscious brain, our automatic brain. This is the part of our brain that responds fast. It's very emotional. It's uncontrolled. So even though I've sort of told us that the A square is the same color as the B square, we still sort of automatically, many of us see them, or most of us, I'd assume, see them as being vastly different. On the right-hand side, we can see what might be known as our system 2. So this is our more reflective brain. It's our more evolutionary recent brain, our prefrontal cortex and our cortical areas. This is a really expensive part of the human brain to use. It costs a lot of sugar, a lot of glucose to tap into it. So we tend to revert more often than not to our system 1. Our system 2 is slow, it's effortful, but it's self-aware. And because it's self-aware, we tend to assume that it has more control over our thinking than it often does. So what we want to really sort of think about today is what are some of the elements within our system 1 that we can best understand to drive our health, happiness, and productivity. And quickly, just before we get into some of the specifics of the paper and some discussion with Ashu, wanted to share just how we're starting to experiment with this thinking for clients across the globe. So on the left-hand side, we can see an image of some shop shutters. And what we actually found was that the round face of children and the round eyes of children actually release an oxytocin response. So they make us feel more sort of pro-social to each other. And we found actually that in an area of London, we were able to reduce antisocial behavior by spray painting and painting children's faces on shop fronts. We had a 24% reduction in crime with something so simple as that. Something that you might assume, get more police on the streets, increase the fines. Actually, we can approach this in a slightly different way. In the middle there, you can see an image of a hand with a hand stamp. We've conducted a lot of work, and this is really relevant today in hygiene behaviors and food processing plants. And one of the challenges with washing your hands is that you don't get a sort of a sense of completion or feedback. It's very hard to see the microbacteria that we're washing off, right? We just can't see it. So what we did was developed a hygiene hand stamp. So we created a hand stamp with a dirty looking salmonella that people, as they walked into this food processing plant, they stamped on their hands, and then all they needed to do was wash that stamp off. So by giving something that was salient to clean off, we actually had a 63% reduction in dangerously contaminated hands with something as small as that. On the right hand side, an example of some work that we've done in contact centers. We did some work actually with Adobe in India on their inbound contact center, looking at people to retain the product suites. And what we found was that most of the initial responses was, why are you calling to cancel your Adobe subscription? Which sort of makes sense when we look through our fractured binoculars. But what this actually also does is commit people to canceling. If you say you're going to do something, then you're more likely to follow it through with it. So all we did here was change the opening sentence. Rather than asking why did you why did you call to cancel, we asked, why did you join Adobe in the first place? 3 more quick examples. Just on the left hand side here, and we can see a simple piece of direct mail for Worcester Council in the UK, looking to increase self-debt sign-offs. What we actually did, we're encouraging people to have direct debit on their payments for particular care. We just introduced a difficulty rating, making direct debit feel really easy compared to going into the council or to sign up on check. So just by framing the decision, we had a 61% increase in direct debit sign-off. The example in the middle for KFC, some work we did with their value range in Australia. So a few times a year, they sell chips for $1, and our challenge was to increase the perceived value of that product. And what we found actually on every piece of advertising that we ever did for this particular product is we had a maximum of 4 packets per customer. But we had that in a sort of a small disclaimer at the bottom of the screen. All we did was actually turn that into the headline. By creating a limitation, we're able to actually boost perceptions of value. and we had a 56% increase in total chip sales year on year, and we're able to actually drill into that to see that we had an 87% increase in 4-chip transactions, something very small that was buried in the product. And the final example, just some work for British Airways looking at conversion, the difference between saying find flights or find my flights. We know if we have a sense of endowment or ownership, we value something more, and we were able to have significant increases in revenue for British Airways by introducing the word my. So they already felt that they were my flights, therefore more likely to follow through. So that's a bit of an overview of behavioral science, of how we're starting to articulate and bring it into business. We wanted to now share a piece of work that the team has driven in response to social distancing, to see how we can start to consider our health, our happiness, and productivity during these times. So in partnership with the talent unit in Ogilvy. So healthy, how might we maintain the best of health while working remotely? When we look at happiness, is there a way in which we might be able to keep happy, energized, and connected with each other, and being productive? How do we actually get the most from the time that we do spend working? So first, let's look at health. So how do we drive health? So a couple of tips here that we've identified. The first is protecting old habits. So when you can, doing whatever you can to maintain existing routines. Oftentimes now we're actually getting a commute back. So we're getting 15, 20 minutes, maybe even an hour each way that we can have back in our day. So how can we sort of keep this routine? How might we protect this time? Even if it's sort of 15, 20 minutes reading a book that you might have done on the train, how can you maintain these old habits? Staying connected is really important, and this is a piece of thinking we did when we were first sort of locked down, and the concern, I mean, human connection is critical to our health. It's really important for our brain activity and our psychological well-being. So the tip here was to follow a 2-hour rule. If you haven't spoken to someone for 2 hours, reach out to bounce ideas off a friend or off a colleague. What I'm certainly finding is I'm looking to find 2 hours away from someone now, which has been a sort of an interesting response, because now there's so many different channels that people might be able to access us on. We're sort of connected with sort of digitization into our veins. So actually what we might be learning, and it'd be interesting to hear some responses from the group, is that this is critically important, but might not be such an issue. On the right-hand side, we can see here the response of check-in. So check in with ourselves and with others. And this is really about understanding our emotional well-being and practicing gratitude. Lots of really strong literature regarding mindfulness and gratefulness. So by understanding our emotional state and by giving ourselves a metric on a form score, the team at G24 have developed a great sort of form score that we'll show in a moment. How can we identify where we are and practice gratefulness in consistency? And the last elements of health that we unearthed is really also making sure we do talk both the big and the small. Certainly when we're discussing with teams or working within communities, because we don't have the walk from the elevator to the room, we don't have the time at the water cooler, we're missing really valuable opportunities for social connection, for casual and spontaneous connection, the chit in the chat that we've identified. So even with some client meetings, we're actually having sort of 10 minutes just for banter, for catch up. How do we make sure we protect this casual conversation? Because there's a lot in again, our health and interconnectivity, rather than being formal 24 hours a day. Unleash the Hounds in the middle there at the bottom, lovely associations between proximity to animals and health and well-being. I know in our office in London, it's very frequent for us to have dogs throughout the building, always boosts the mood. So the advice here when we share this internally, if you have a dog, share it. Put it on your lap for a meeting, let other people be exposed to this. Lovely research with proximity to animals and animal interaction that lowers blood pressure and boosts our mental health. So if you're lucky to have that in your home or in your apartment, please share it, even if it's by digital means. And the last one here on the bottom right is about new tricks. If we think of the sort of the plasticity of the human brain, by learning new things, we keep our synapses fresh. We give ourselves a challenge to boost mastery, something that we might have ownership of, an achievement. Sometimes we might find we're sort of facing a mountain at the moment that we can't climb. What are some things that we can achieve by ourselves that can keep the brain alive? So give yourself a commute. This is a lovely image we found. How can we sort of give ourselves some structure when routine is broken down? When we can, unleash the hounds, give people access to your animals. It'll make us happier and healthier as a result. And try new tricks. So this is an image, if you see in the middle, Mike Hughes, gentleman on my team, I was learning the guitar. So these are sometimes we have meetings and Mike just sings his updates because it's a way of ensuring that we continue he continues to drive that behavior. I also mentioned about checking in. So I wanted to share something that our team is doing every day. So we meet digitally twice a day in the morning. We touch on this element known as our form score. As I mentioned, the team from G24 developed this really lovely way of codifying how we're feeling. So we're mindful of our feelings. So 10 is lifetime peak. 1 is I'm in crisis and I need help now. So really important that we know where we are individually, but also collectively. We identify our focus for the day, we highlight what support might be needed, and we share a gratitude statement. And that might be for coffee, that could be for our family, that could be for the Tiger King on Netflix. It doesn't really matter. It starts to change our brain to be seeking the positives, not stuff what might be in the negatives. And finally, in the afternoon, we review our form score. We share a bit of a surprise of the day to keep some novelty, and we'll talk about novelty in a moment when it comes to happiness, and provide again sort of gratitude, but in the guise of thanks. So that's a little bit about health. We wanted to ask, how are you keeping healthy? Are there any of these tips that we're finding that we're deploying ourselves? Whether it's keeping old habits, so where possible, maintaining existing routines, checking in with our emotions or expressing gratitude, talking big and small, so making time for the small talk, unleashing the hounds. If you're already sharing your dogs with pride, please tell us, and learning new tricks. Have you actually taken the COVID-19 experience to find something new? So thanks, Rohit, you've put that up just now. And we can answer many of these or none of these. Great to sort of get a steer.
Yeah, so the poll is open. You can.
Sorry, Ro. I'm just keen, Ashu. I'd love to know also from this list anything that you've embraced yourself, you've seen your team embrace.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Making time for small talk is, I think, integral part of every meeting that happens.
Yeah.
And I think the same thing. I mean, whether it's pets, bringing them to some of the calls,
yes.
People who have them are sharing those, and so we are following some of the recommendations that we put to great use, and I think it really helps. Some of it doesn't always work the way you intend to do, right? So, for instance, checking in. I normally what I do is I keep my calendar free of other meetings between 3 and 5 in the afternoon every day, because I want to use that time to do the more informal kind of check-ins.
Yes.
Now, which are great. However, there is an unintended consequence of these informal check-ins sometimes, is that, you start the day with a very clear focus on the kind of things that you want to achieve. And quite often, some of these informal check-ins have led to that agenda getting a bit delayed or derailed sometimes. So you have to be just careful in finding the balance.
And I think that's a really good point. We'll talk a little bit that on productivity, just how quickly our day can get away with us.
Yes.
And I think while sometimes in an office environment we have external distractions, I think what's sort of the perceived unlimited access that people feel they might have of us now, we're sort of connected so strongly digitally, whether that's even more.
Absolutely.
Also, one of the other elements I thought was missing in this one, and not that everything is captured, is small children on screens. They add a lot of value. I think it's closer to unleashing the hounds. It's small children on screen. I personally had the opportunity to be on some calls with small children come and just interrupt the conversation, and it's a good hearty laugh that people have, and everybody's got used to it. I remember it happened a year back, first time on a BBC interview when a child walked into a
Yes.
thing. That was the first time we ever saw it in real life, and now it's
Um,
become part of everybody's the conversation, every Zoom call, and it's a very lighter moment. And children, as they say, bring happiness to everything that happens.
It reminds us
Small
that we're
children,
human. It reminds us that we're human, and I think
yes.
that's what people are seeking: authenticity.
yeah.
And again, it's not by design. For many of us, it's by necessity. If I don't have my daughter or my son on my lap, this meeting doesn't happen. But I think it's a real positive to come from that, so long as it's great.
I would like to take this opportunity. I think there's a very relevant question. There are a lot of questions coming in, so please keep sending your questions. There's a very interesting question by Priyanka Day. She's a creative associate at Topline. How do you stay sane with the overwhelming flow of content available right now?
Yeah.
And I think that is well balanced with the mental ability to keep sane and mental health and everything else. How do you, and especially with a lot of content which is not positive?
Yes. Yeah, I think there's really good question. There's two elements in my eyes. Maybe there's sort of content insofar as demands or emails or responses to you through 1,000 different channels, whether it's Teams or Zoom or WhatsApp or whatever it might be. But the second is just the content that's being written, that's available online. And I think sort of one of the strategies is, firstly, I mean, and if it's negative and overwhelming, is to be mindful of that. To know the impact of some of this information, to know that to a degree, obviously it's important that we're aware of it, but to understand it's sort of the repercussions on your sanity. But the second piece there is, again, just chunking up, making time for this. So Nirial, if you've come across Nirial, he wrote the book what was his well, his second book, I'll remember his first book in a moment. His second book was Indistractable. His first book was Hooked, so it's an interesting, so he wrote Hooked and then he wrote Indistractable. And I spoke with Nirial a couple of months ago talking about how you can maintain your focus and actually just building time for things that otherwise people might consider to be a waste of time. Put time in your calendar to check Facebook. Right? So long as that's how you're deciding to use your time, that's great. If you're deciding to use an hour a day looking at content, then that's great, so long as it feels like it's purposeful and planned. It's when it's unpurposeful and unplanned that it might become sort of problematic, and it starts to sort of creep into other activities that are better for your progress, your purpose, your well-being. So I think Nirial, Indistractable, a great book, and I think he'd have a good point of view there too.
Yeah, Sam, I think that's a great point. In fact, consciously over the last few weeks, I can see that I have cut down any use of social media which is not planned. So firstly, it's limited. It's extremely limited compared to what it used to be before this current situation started. And I think some of it was also maybe a reaction to just there was too much content, exactly the question which has been asked. And your day was running out of your hands if you just try to do that. So of course it requires a lot of discipline, but I've absolutely, I must say, I must significantly cut down time that I spend on social media. And it goes either on planned interactions or even the chit chat, which we were just talking about. You know, there's a lot more of the conversation, even if it's a WhatsApp call with friends and family, you know, colleagues who one hasn't met for a long time. We've been setting up, you know, Zoom calls in the evenings, let's say on a Friday evening for a reunion. And therefore, all that time which previously used to go into social media at such times or during commutes is now not there. So it's selectively a filter that I personally use these days.
That's a lovely one. Should we learn a little bit or cover some areas in happiness now and continue the discussion?
Yes.
So great to have an understanding and sort of a few tips on health. Let's talk happiness. So really, and we've touched on this a little bit just now, but really focusing on social media, not just media. So how can we sort of connect more meaningfully to maintain close relationships? And here, the power of faces and hearing voices are more powerful than just voices or text alone. So our brains react really positively to faces. So when we can, use sort of a FaceTime or a Zoom or a Teams, but have your screen enabled. It's great to get that facial feedback. I know we can't do it now. Mix it up. The brain craves novelty. Repetition can be really dull. We know sort of variable reinforcement keeps us motivated to continue an objective. So when possible, in a meeting or in your day, mix it up. Think green. This is a lovely sort of system one evolved response. Embrace a concept known as biophilia. Surrounding ourselves with nature can enhance sort of our connection with nature, and the colors and greenery of organic shapes really help to boost our mood. So whether that's just having a pot plant on your desk or surrounding your home with greenery, there's some really sort of some great benefits of embracing biophilia. Getting physical, I won't talk about for too long. I think we intuitively get it. Let's not sort of neglect exercise to keep our endorphins pumping, to make us feel good. On the bottom left, we can see sensory connection. So often with teams, we have lots of sort of planned calls and planned events. How can we increase our sort of sensory connection? So sharing our environments with others that we typically would. As a working team, often we have Zoom DJ events. So someone in the team is the DJ on Zoom, so at least we can sort of share and connect to the same music. It takes us to another level of coherence, connectedness, boosts our happiness. Owning your space, taking charge of your home, and really sort of owning your daily routine. So this might be as simple as sort of packing your briefcase as you move from the bedroom into the study. At least you're able to sort of give some sense of focus and place, and do our best not to work from our bedroom or our beds, because these should be associated with sleeping and rest. So doing our best to sort of own our space. Second to last, helping others. Lovely research on how altruistic behaviors and actually sort of helping others sort of boosts our own mental well-being, our own happiness. I know many of us are already doing volunteering or supporting others in need, and this is something that the research is very strong about. And finally, considering our stomach. So make sure as we have times of high digital contact or in isolation, making sure that we're still considering what goes in our belly, and that's from a health perspective, but also using that as a route to our brain. So food that makes us feel good as well to drive happiness. So mixing it up, we do some things like an item challenge. So on a call, you've got to go and someone's got to bring their sunglasses or what's their favorite stuffed toy, or on the right hand side, sort of where in the world. So in Zoom, you can sort of pick your dream destination you'd like to be here now, and that can be the backdrop for your call. So any way in which you can sort of drive novelty and mix things up. So really quick, again, another poll that I think the questions are also on the poll that Rohit can drive, but using social media, seeing faces, not just hearing voices, mixing it up, creating variability in your working style, thinking green, how are we embracing biophilia in our home to surround ourselves with an organic world, exercising to release some endorphins, and helping others. So putting time in our day really to give can actually have far greater benefits than we might receive. Actually, this is an interesting area, and I think we were talking just before around how happiness, I mean, we know in many countries there is a ministry for happiness.
Yes.
And now I think some businesses have a responsibility here.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, taking many manifestations at the moment. But I mean, some of the examples which I can share, the way we set up some of the meetings and how we do it. So just to give you a quick example on this one. So every day in the evening around either 7 or 8 o'clock, I know it's late for this part of the world, but it's a global leadership team meeting that we have. And about half an hour of it is serious stuff. Half an hour of it is just checking in on each other and just having fun. And I can tell you that this is probably one of the, despite the time zones, the guy in the US is sitting in his apartment at 7 in the morning, and then midday in the UK, and then here it's early evening. But that is probably one of the most wanted cause by all the participants every day. They all look forward to this because of the way it's run. The CEO comes to the meeting with a new stuffed toy every day. Someone brings a dog, and we have a lot of banter in the last half an hour. The North America CEO, unfortunately, is stuck in a tiny apartment just at the beginning of this lockdown. So for him, 7 in the morning, this is his highlight of the day. So everyone is looking out for each other, and bringing some of these techniques into play is enormously helping, I think.
That's great, and we can see some of that in the results. Sort of mixing it up. 41% of us are really actively trying to create some variability in our working style. A smaller percentage of embracing biophilia at home, but that's still a large proportion. I think many of us, over 50% of us, aren't sort of consciously thinking about exercise, and we know it's tough going outside, but there are some ways in which we can, again, just get the blood pumping. Lots of great research there. Fantastic. Thank you, Ashu. I'll move on to the last component, shall I?
Yeah, let's go ahead.
So now we're looking at productivity. So again, some of this, as we mentioned, in partnership with our talent teams, just starting to really double down on some of the basics, but not forgetting the power of structure and chunking up the day. So the first, and I'll start on the top left, getting into flow. So how do we reduce temptations to task switch? It can be very easy with bleeps and blings and things that are vying for our attention. How can we enable ourselves to get into deep thinking? We've talked about just now about structuring time to look at Facebook, or structuring time to have organic meetings. How do we structure and use this time to really embrace flow? Out of office, you can see in the middle at the top, a really interesting challenge of virtual presenteeism. The fact that sort of, because people can't see us now, we sort of feel like we need to be even more available than we have been in the past. We need to feel like we're showing the working harder because people actually can't see us there. So something for us to really be aware of and start to trust ourselves and each other that we're working away. Setting expectations, again, this is another thing which is tough when there is we can't observe how someone is responding at any one time, or the pressures that someone else might be in that you might typically see in the office, but really doubling down on being clear on expectations, on timings, what will happen and when it will happen, and driving the simplicities of agendas in meetings. These sort of brilliant basics we need to be bringing far more so to manage expectations of people that we can't see. On the bottom row now, really quickly, eat the frog. If you've not sort of entered this term, really we sort of have a bad problem of hyperbolic discounting. We tend to delay the tough stuff and really embrace the chocolate bars, the immediate stuff, and that's the same with our workload. And we can start the day with the sort of the nice easy stuff, and we can leave the ugly stuff for the afternoon. And the analogy was, if you were sort of to need to eat a frog every day for the rest of your life, when would you do it? In the morning. Eat the frog in the morning, get it done, and have the rest of the day. Engage in meetings, certainly in visual meetings. Don't be what we would call a sort of a muted ninja. Use this opportunity to get your voice heard, and keep iterating. The final piece that we're advising our own teams to continue to discover new ways and share new ways to be productive. So trust, keep experimenting, and don't go quiet. Just because you're distanced by a screen, don't go on mute, don't be an invisible attendee. So how are we being productive? Are we consciously focusing ourselves to get into flow and trying not to switch tasks? Are we sort of embracing our out of office, telling people we're uncontactable to avoid this sense of presenteeism? Are we really sort of consciously setting expectations? Can we start to eat the frog, focus on the negatives or the tough projects at the beginning of the day, and ensuring that we're engaging in meetings and not being a muted ninja? Ashu, I'd love to hear, again, a lot of this is sort of speaking internally within teams, but love to see some of your experience sort of working internally or across business units.
Yes, I mean, I think because of the current situation, there's a lot of people looking out for each other, and being mindful of the fact that this is not a normal time where you can, just count on people's time to be available for you at any point. So give you a good recent example. Some of you would have seen among the viewers of this webinar, some of you would have seen some recent PR on a massive consolidation of Unilever's business in China with WPP. I must say that the whole exercise, which started just around the beginning of the COVID crisis and concluded within 8 weeks, was a phenomenal exercise in productivity. I've never seen, it's extraordinary, never seen anything like this, because the task was quite huge. It required pulling in people, creating solutions from a number of locations around the world. Again, all working on a platform like Microsoft Teams in this instance, to pull the proposed solution together. Some extremely productive meetings with the Unilever China team, which was looking at those proposals. Again, done with technology, and kept extremely sharp and productive, including the questions, and because there wasn't the luxury of, oh, we will meet again and we can informally catch up on this at another time, let's go grab a coffee. None of that was possible. So everyone focused very tightly on what was the task at hand, what had to be delivered, and the whole process ran in record time and came to a conclusion very, very swiftly. So yes, obviously there's a huge challenge out there, but it is also forcing everyone to make use of technology tools, be mindful of and respectful, therefore, each other's time that they're taking, and therefore be far more disciplined in the way we are approaching business meetings.
I think discipline is important, right? It can be easy to let things get away from us, but reminding ourselves of the discipline, I think, is critical.
Yeah. I mean, in all this, I also have a question from you, Sam. These are all terrific insights that have been pulled together. So using behavioral science principles, what really made you come to these specific things as the sort of magic bullets?
Really good question, and some elements that are great from psychological literature, like gratitude, like mindfulness practice. I think these help to sort of really steer a lot of our work. Some elements are also combining with our talent team best practice and ways in which we can sort of help us remind ourselves of the things that we want to do every day to keep it sort of mentally available and top of mind. And then there are some elements that we might not typically find, like the psychology of biophilia, the emotional response that we have to animals. These are things that if we sort of might often underestimate. It's a bit of a sort of our rational system 2 brain might underestimate the power of a pot plant or an animal on our screen, whereas our system 1, our heavily emotional brain, laps this up. So it's a great question, and it's a good collection across the business of things that we felt across the core challenges of health and happiness and productivity, how we can bring them to bear.
It's brilliant.
We can see some great responses of people trying to get into flow and really sort of engaging in meetings. This digital presenteeism, sort of this opportunity to embrace an out of office, sort of possibly less of a response there from the broader unit. Great to sort of hear why that's the case. It might be sort of different styles of work, the difficulty in getting into sort of deep work, or maybe just the sense that presenteeism is an issue in your business. But thank you for everyone sort of playing along. It's good to see how we're operating there. Yeah, so we've had some Q&A throughout, but here's a bit more time.
Rohit, questions? Any questions coming up?
Yes, there are a few questions. So let me just start with the first question. The first question is about keeping old habits. So if you are, the question is, if you're keeping, and there are a couple of them in this segment. So if you're keeping old habits, how is it possible to maintain and develop new habits? And where's the time to do that? How does mind work to make that happen?
Well, new habits are really interesting because sometimes you need to also understand the old habit. So if often, and I think we're all finding that something might need to be replaced, even if it's just watching the TV. So if you think of habit, you can break it down from what's the trigger or the stimulus that elicited the action, what's the action itself and why might that have been easy or routine, and also what's the reward that you might have received as a result of it. So for example, if you actually have a habit at 7 o'clock, you want to watch the news or watch TV, what's the trigger? The trigger just might be the time. It's 7 p.m. This is what I do, right? The action is really easy because I've got a TV in my lounge, and the benefit is relaxation or escape or information. So if we want to introduce, let's say like Mike, like playing the guitar, how do we use 7 p.m. as the alarm for this is the reminder? How can we put the guitar on the couch? So we have to pick up the guitar before we sit down to watch the TV. And how can we start to reframe the benefits of playing the guitar, not just sort of learning, but again, escape, focus, mindfulness. So we can start to sort of decouple old habits as we look to build new ones.
Yeah, that's a great one. Just to add to what Sam's saying, I mean, this bit about mindfulness. So all the points that you've got in this talk, I mean, a lot of these seem intuitive and common sense. Obviously, they're all well-founded in principles of behavioral science. But what I find helpful, for instance, is there are 3 charts in your presentation, which I have stuck on the computer that I work on as rotating wallpaper. So it constantly keeps reminding me, and therefore keeps it top of mind.
Yes, lovely idea.
Ashu, this question I think is for you. From the 3 things, health, happiness, and productivity, which way should the brands use to talk with their consumers in crisis circumstances, and what is the best way to communicate to brands?
I mean,
what are your learnings and your conversations with your clients so far, and how are you advising them, and what are you seeing from them?
So, I mean, this can be a really, really long answer. So let me just try and keep it to some very basic points. And I'm just screening out the brands which have obvious association with the time like this, you know, like hand sanitizers or hand soaps and stuff like that, which, I mean, that is obvious to all of us on this call. But some brands, I mean, we've talked to them, which are taking a stance on the current situation to try and make life easy for their consumers. Either it's just a solidarity message or they're trying to get them to do things otherwise. So Nike, for instance, has stepped up the communication with the consumers a lot in trying to keep people healthy when they are locked up at home, through constant communication on how they can bring exercise and some form of physical fitness throughout the day. You know, these are things that they were not doing before the current situation because they had a different way of creating and running campaigns. So brands are trying to make themselves useful. Some are just taking a stance. You saw CocaCola switched off all regular advertising and communication for these 3 months and only switched on to public health messages, for instance. So different brands are coming to people with things that they think will be helpful in navigating the current situation for them.
Okay, great. I guess we have time for maybe two very quick answers, or 2 questions with very short answers, or 1 pretty long. So let me start off with the first question. How do you build trust? We as human beings are not used to having a lot of virtual conversations. So Ashu, again, I start with you in short. How do you build trust in a client relationship or in a remote working employee relationship in these circumstances?
Yeah, so I mean, if I look at my own personal experience, the face-to-face communication is not something you can replace, but luckily the technology has also evolved so swiftly, Sarpreet, since the onset of this crisis, that all of us are using a lot of video communication. We are not on this webinar, but otherwise, I must say that these days, from my entire workday, about 90% of my communication is video communication, and it is by design. It's just that you want both or multiple participants to actually see the person when they speak, so that you can really get the context and the body language and everything when you're talking. So it's still no substitute for being in the same room, but still being able to see each other. Because I mean, I'm sure Sam can probably look at this from his behavioral science perspective, but trust is built through a number of actions, right? And it's also to do with how you interact with people, your integrity, the way you interact with them now through technology. It's a number of things that come into play, right?
Okay. Sorry, we're running out of time. So I'm gonna give a question to both you and Sam, and to answer in one line. What is your response to clients as they are stuck under the apprehension of future? What would you tell them in one line?
What would we tell clients as they're stuck on the direction for the future?
Yeah, under the apprehension about the future business.
For me, I think, I mean, it's very difficult to know always what the future holds. So start to think about a process in which can help us every day. So what do we observe in the market? What are the implications of this, and how do we respond? And that can be a cyclical way of thinking. So what's the observation? What are the implications? How do we respond? And sometimes our time horizons might need to be shorter than we would typically.
Yeah, I would say the same. In one line to sum up would be track consumer behavior closely and keep adapting what you're doing in order to match to that.
Okay, great. Thank you both of you for your time. Really appreciate you taking the time today for making this webinar happen. Thank you everybody for your time. We are right at 4 o'clock, so I will take this opportunity to once again thank you all for participating and for your valuable time. We look forward to having you guys engaged at all our other webinars as we move forward. So with that, thank you once again. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Ashu, for your time. And we look forward to having you guys back sometime soon.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having us. Thanks for attending.